everyone. My name is Yolanda Scott. I'm the host of Social Work in Action. Today's topic, we will be discussing domestic violence. And today's guest, we have Sharia Former from Philadelphia.
Well, I'm from New Jersey, but I'm in Philadelphia. I
Okay.
always gotta make sure people know that.
Okay, from New Jersey. And she's a licensed social worker. Sharia, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I guess I can start by saying I'm a licensed social worker, a proud licensed social worker here in both New Jersey and Philadelphia. I'm licensed. I've been licensed for about 10 years now, 10 maybe 12. I'm getting a little older. I actually am a macro level social worker. What that means is that primarily I do business consultant work as well as trainings on specific topics, and I teach at our state university here in New Jersey, Rutgers University. I teach our social work I'm an adjunct professor for our social work program. There I teach depression and diversity, or excuse me, oppression and diversity, and strategic planning and program design, excuse me, as well as clinical work with adolescents and children, which are three of my favorite things to talk about, which is culture, adolescence and youth, and starting your own business and actually running it and being successful and not having to go against your ethics or values to be able to do so. So that's my overall, but I can go on and on about the many areas I work in, and I really enjoy all of them because that's what's great about social work. You don't have to minimize yourself to one area and say that's all I can do. So
Exactly. Well, it sounds like that you are very diverse.
yeah.
You have a diverse portfolio.
Yes.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about domestic violence, which domestic violence, as you and I both know, is a serious situation, unfortunately, that's continually going on in around the world. And so as a social worker, I just want to get how social workers deal with their clients when it comes to domestic violence. So as for statistics, I have a few statistics regarding domestic violence. Every 9 seconds in the U.S., a woman is assaulted or beaten. Around the world, at least 1 in every 3 women has been beaten, coerced into having sex, or otherwise abused during their lifetime. Most often, the abuser is a member of her own family. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women, more than car accidents, muggings, and rapes combined. Studies suggest that up to 10 million children witness some form of domestic violence annually, and nearly 1 in 5 teenage girls who have been in a relationship said a boyfriend threatened violence or self-harm if presented with a breakup.
Yes.
So those statistics are very
Startling.
startling. Yeah,
And sad.
startling and sad. Yes.
And I think, when we talk about domestic violence, and I'm going to just give a little bit of the reason why I chose this subject when we talked about one of the things that I can talk about with you is that domestic violence is a serious topic for a lot of us. We don't like to talk about it. But personally, I've lost someone in my life related to domestic violence, and a lot of the same signs and things that we all are so quick to say or pass by or just say, oh, well, she should have left or should have did this, comes down to really making a decision that we have to intervene at some point. And a lot of it is happening every single day in most of our lives, and we're kind of walking past it without acknowledging it. And part of it is just the small signs and identifying them and knowing that this person needs help or finding out how I can help this person.
Right.
Before it gets to those stats or statistics that you talked about. One of the statistics that I also wanted to just add was that about 1,500 women each year are actually murdered or killed by their partners annually, which means that if we think about not only are you experiencing the domestic violence, but most likely there are those who are going to end in death as a result of the violence. The other thing is that for domestic violence during pregnancy, it actually is one of the top killers for women who are actually, I believe it's 3 months or more in terms of the type of death or a death during pregnancy. So domestic violence is something that we have to take serious as the media gets a hold on it because of the football stories or because of the violence in industries like entertainment industries is one thing, but we need to also look into our neighborhoods, look into our communities, and start doing something.
Right.
Because it's not even when you look at the statistics, these statistics have not changed regardless of hotlines, shelters, public awareness hasn't changed in decades. So these statistics continue to happen, which means that our culture and violence towards women have to stop.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to make sure I made that point for why, this was one of the things that I chose to talk about, because we could have talked about a number of things.
Yeah.
But domestic violence is worth starting with.
Yeah. Okay. So as social workers, one of the things we do is we provide crisis intervention before it gets to the point of harm or like you said, possibly death, and that's our goal, is to try to prevent that from happening if we are aware of such things. So can you give us a definition of abuse?
Yes. Because it's various different definitions that we may hear. The overall definition is the use of physical force by one adult member of the household against another adult member. Now, domestic violence equates to being different than violence against women because of the word domestic. So when we see domestic violence, the household becomes the part that we have to remember is how they got the definition. However, violence against women is still, you can still take into consideration the same things that we're going to discuss today in terms of like causes, the behaviors. So even if you are not living with the person, you could still be experiencing what is considered dating violence and spousal violence, and it not just be domestic violence. So I wanted to also make that clear. But the definition is the use of physical force by one adult member of the household against another. And what we're going to talk about a little bit later is that we need to also understand that it does not mean just physical force.
Yes, exactly. And that was one of the things I wanted to mention too, because we have physical abuse. So, and some people, negate the fact that any type of physical abuse, it's abuse. A push, a shove, a slap, a kick, it's abuse. A bite. Yeah.
A pinch.
Yeah. It's abuse. Okay, so we also have sexual abuse.
Yes. One other thing I wanted to mention is that because we're talking about domestic violence and women's violence, I also want us to make sure that we understand that this definition is for not just women. But the reason that we're going to discuss women is because violence against women is about 90% of the domestic violence that we discuss in this country. So although it's not to discredit that men are abused as well, it's to say that 90% needs to be addressed. And so maybe if we get that right, we can even get that 10% down some. So I just wanted to make that point as well, just because I don't want people to be like, well, men also, they do. Yeah. But when you look at a statistic saying about 90% of the abuse in this country towards our spouses or our loved ones is women, then I think we need to really take into consideration that that's the priority at this point.
Okay, yeah, and that's a good point too. We don't want to, assume that men aren't getting, abused as well, because they are. But it is more prevalent in this country that women are the victims of domestic violence. So that's a good point. So you have a definition for sexual abuse? Is that just...
For sexual abuse is forcing or coercing, basically manipulating or getting a person to do sexual acts, rape, and or having sex without wanting to have it. Which means that you may have just had sex because if I don't do it, he might beat me later on. So you're not so much being raped and violently put down and assaulted, but you're going to do it just so that you can get this moment over with or to prevent something else from happening.
Okay. Or maybe, the women being treated as sex objects or being criticized sexually or maybe if a woman is even called like a slut or a whore for not, wanting to participate, in the
in
sexual,
those type.
yeah, in the
And a lot
sexual
of that
act.
becomes how abusers actually use, and when we talk about the cycle of abuse, and we'll talk about that later, a lot of it becomes the definitions that we're going to give for each of them, say emotional abuse, sexual abuse, social abuse.
Hmm.
When you look at those individual definitions, a lot of what abuse is all of them, not just one. And
Right.
so what happens is that usually they escalate from one onto the other. So I might have started off by calling you a name like, well, all of you and your friends are sluts.
Yeah.
So it might have started with that conversation, and then eventually I'm treating you like one in
Yeah.
terms of actually now making you have sex when you don't want to have sex, or making you wear things you don't want to wear, or if you wear something that I feel is not appropriate, I'm calling you names. So when it comes to sexual abuse, the acts are the actual definition of the abuse,
Hmm.
but then those things that you mentioned in terms of language and how is that's actually falling into emotional abuse.
Yeah. Okay, and that's a good point because a lot of women, they may be experiencing one aspect of a
Mm-hmm.
certain point of abuse, and then they may hear a different definition of abuse and feel like that doesn't apply to them, although they're still
Exactly.
being abused.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to, go through all of the definitions to know that there's more than one type of
Exactly.
abuse, and there's more than, one definition of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about emotional abuse?
And emotional abuse, you actually led into it really well with the language calling, the intimidation, or things that will make you feel bad about yourself. So
Hmm.
the definition is jealousy, anger, intimidation, controlling, neglect, humiliation, and threats, and isolation and verbal abuse. So using language or ways to make you feel bad about yourself emotionally. So that's where the name calling comes in, that you're not a good mother. So
Hmm.
if we take it from a different perspective than sexual abuse, it could even be you look fat. If you
Hmm.
wear that, you're unhealthy.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to want to be with you when you look like that. You should be happy to have a man like me. So it
Yeah.
starts to do what? Mess up your self-esteem or your
Yeah.
self-image. So what he's doing is he's actually controlling you by giving you these thoughts or helping you to see yourself in a way that even entering into the relationship you may not have.
Right.
And so, because I also want to make the point that not everyone who is in domestic violence has low self-esteem or
Hmm.
went into the relationship with low self-esteem.
Hmm.
Sometimes the process of domestic violence can create low self-esteem. And so if I'm starting off by, oh, you know what, you would look better in this outfit, that's because I know what men want, and that's what he's telling you. And then eventually, every time you do anything without his say so,
Hmm.
you get basically degraded.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe my decisions aren't that good for myself. So part of it becomes what he's doing to get you under control is actually working on lowering your self-esteem
Exactly.
versus automatically meaning, because I know we make that assumption, some of the stereotypes is that everyone who has domestic violence, something was wrong with them before they got into it. Well, not always the case.
Yeah.
And in those cases where you might be a strong personality, it does not guarantee that you won't end up in some of these situations.
Yeah.
So,
And one thing we need to realize too is that this is a process.
mm-hmm.
That no abuser ever shows up a as an abuser. Like when you meet him, he doesn't.
They don't hit you on the first date.
Yeah. He doesn't introduce himself as
and slap you.
Yeah, like I'm Joe the abuser. That
exactly.
It takes time, and it takes time. To wear, like you said, wear the woman down or to wear her self-esteem down. So this process is gradual.
Yes. And in most cases, it's extremely gradual. So sometimes it could be a year, maybe 2 years into a relationship. It doesn't always have to be the first week, the first month of a relationship. It really can extend into a long-term relationship. And in a lot of cases, some women will tell you, until I got pregnant or until we got married, they have these situations that say, up until that point, I didn't see the physical abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was we weren't identifying some of these other things first.
Right, exactly. Okay, so what are the causes?
Oh wait, we didn't talk about financial abuse. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Did you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. Only because I know right now we have a few campaigns going on with domestic violence that I think are awesome to mention. Kerry Washington has the Purple Purse. which is basically trying to talk about how to make sure you control your own finances. So domestic violence, when it comes to financial abuse, is controlling access to money and other resources, forces you to live without money or live within some type of means that is connected to him controlling. So basically, when it comes to economic abuse or financial abuse, a lot of it is about controlling your access to resources, which means that you can't do things without him. Right. And that could be as simple as getting your hair done. Sounds like, or even getting our nails done. Or how about going to get your groceries? Or even if you needed to buy your feminine products, you don't. So it's like controlling every avenue of your access to resources.
Right.
So I just wanted to not forget that one, because I know when we get to the will, that one becomes extremely important.
Yeah. And that is important, because it's like if you have to get permission to buy groceries or buy a roll of toilet tissue or deodorant, like if you have to run that past,
somebody.
Every time, it's like something is wrong with that.
And how belittling would that make you, right? In terms of making you feel like, when we think about it, if someone were to tell me I had to call my husband right now to decide if I wanted to go and get a sandwich for lunch, I would be like, wait, that doesn't make sense. But what I'm doing is controlling.
Yeah. And that's what happens. It's like women get to the point where they can't make a decision without their mate's approval. So even
and a lot of that is intention.
Yeah. Intentional. Yeah. So it's like, I can't go to the store, I can't go to the movies, or let me call to see if it's okay, or let me call and check in. It's like, it's pretty much, it's like the woman has, I guess, turned from the mate to more of like a child.
Exactly. And a lot of it is, part of the process of isolating you, eliminating relationships that could damage his control. So making sure that if you were daddy's little girl, all of a sudden your dad is the problem, and every time he's around you can't talk to him or you can't tell him anything.
Right.
But part of that is that they're trying to isolate or separate you from those you love, so that they don't have as much insight about what's going on, but also don't have any input about you leaving.
Right.
Exactly. So it's like, as much as, and that's why one of the things that people have this, like you said, Joe, the abuser, doesn't show up at your door.
Yeah.
Actually, usually abusers are very charismatic, very likable people, personalities that might mimic, a narcissistic person, but charming,
Right.
And a lot of that can be attractive.
Yeah.
For someone. And usually if someone's charismatic, you feel like they might have life together, which means that if they're telling you things, maybe you don't have your stuff together.
Right.
And so some of it is just part of their character to be able to do the things that they're going to do to get you in a position to be a part of the abuse cycle. So.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as causes of abuse.
Well, let me start with what doesn't cause abuse,
okay.
Right? Because here's the things that I think people do. They say, well, he was drinking or he was high. So drinking and drugs do not cause abuse.
Exactly.
They might contribute to abuse actions, but they don't cause abuse. Because I could have a margarita, but I don't go and slap my husband.
Right.
Right? So, and the illusion is that stress causes abuse. Just because you're having a stressful day at work, things didn't go your way, or someone doesn't like you, you don't then go and abuse people.
Exactly.
So if stress caused abuse, I think I would abuse someone. I think you would abuse someone.
Yeah.
That means every single person in the world would abuse someone. But stress doesn't cause it. Anger doesn't cause abuse. The illusion is that, if I get angry, I'm going to hit you. Let me just ask you a personal question. Did you get angry within the last year?
Yes.
Did you hit anyone that's because you got angry?
No.
There's how simple of a resolution to a problem. Anger is not. So when we do things like offer anger management, well, yes, I can control my anger, but there's underlying issues for those who are abused. There are underlying issues for those who may be the abuser.
Exactly.
That if they're not addressed, it's bigger than just anger management.
Exactly. So now, anger management is just basically putting a Band-Aid.
Exactly. It's an element of the issue.
Yeah.
It's not the only portion or the cause of the issue.
Yeah.
Other thing that doesn't cause it is mutual fighting. If I hear one more person say, well, I was fighting back.
Yeah.
You hear that statement, I was fighting back.
Yeah.
That indicates that someone initiated the relationship abuse.
Exactly.
Now, I can't tell you who did that, but I do know enough about gender roles to say that in this country, the primary gender role that rules that area of control is male. And if we don't stop that illusion that fighting back equates to not being domestic violence, then we'll have a problem. Yeah. And the last thing is, family problems do not cause domestic violence. Because if they did, do you know how many people we would, instead of saying 1 in 4, we would say 1 in 1. But everybody would have.
Everybody has family problems.
And when we look at the economy and how bad things have gotten for most people in this country, if it was just the issue of family problems, then we would have everyone being abused at some point in their life and or currently, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things that don't cause this. I wanted to get that point made first.
Okay, so let's get that right. Those things do not cause.
Only because it's just such a those are the things that stereotypically most people will run past you and say, oh, you know, he was drunk, so that's the only reason he hit me.
Excuses.
Well, no, and that's the word, excuses. Yeah. Those aren't causes.
Yeah.
And so since we got those out, I'll give you some reasons that abuse is a learned behavior.
Okay.
So things like modeling within families. So some of our family history becomes extremely important. When you recognize abuse as a learned behavior, then you also can understand even how some people who might have very strong personalities can even be in those relationships, as well as be the abuser in the relationship. So if my family, my father, intimidated my mother or hit my mother and it was normal, then what do you think I'm going to believe is normal in a relationship?
Exactly.
So some of it is a model behavior as well as socialization. So it may not just be an issue of your family, but we have clear roles about women and men in this country. And when we think about how women are a product of the relationship, which means that they only are successful as their relationship versus men having the choice of relationship, which means that they get to decide who they want to date or be around. They can use things like, well, I don't have to be with you. You're not good enough woman. And so even that form of socialization and even being around other people who abuse, right? So it doesn't have to always be just your family.
Yeah.
And then violence is also a positive reinforcement in this country. So we actually reward violence.
Yeah.
We have a million cop shows. We have a million different violent descriptions of, forget this, how about this? Video games, cartoons.
Yeah. Let's start with the children.
Let me just go. Yeah, I was going to the adult shows, but when you think about, you were raised on even some of the most violent images. Right. And a lot of times it doesn't stop with male to male or female to female. It will go over to any forms of relationships. And so violent becomes a norm. So some of it is about a learned behavior. Now, that doesn't mean all of it is just that reason. Just like the other things are not cause, they're not the only reason. The other thing is societal. We reinforce violence.
Right.
We reinforce violence, and especially the misconceptions of abused women. And a lot of it comes down to the consequence of not, almost like a child, the consequence of not behaving in your relationship has to have an action.
Yeah.
And so in this country, because we reinforce violence, usually that becomes the escalation of what happens. And even if it doesn't look like violence, like we just talked about the different definitions, it's other ways that we start to have consequences that are negative in our relationships in terms of almost like a child rearing behavior.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it, in the end, that's what those type of relationships seems like. It's like one person is the adult and one person, is the child. And the environment is a very important element that is often missed. I know as social workers, that's that's the person in the environment is what we focus on, and the environment contributes greatly to how a person's life is formed or shaped. Exactly. It has a major impact and influence on, how we treat one another. Like you said, if we grow up, and if we grow up and we see that, your mom and daddy, they grew up fighting, well, we're gonna think that's normal. or even if you grow up and, like I said, these video games, and you know, these days kids, they're playing these video games for hours upon hours upon hours. So
and even if we think about, like, if we go through our Facebook feeds and we have anyone that's a teenager or a young person on it, we're gonna see people videotaping fights. We're gonna see people making a joke or some type of humor over violence towards each other. And so we've actually socialized it so much that violence against women becomes almost a conversation that's in back of violence, not just in front of it.
It seems like we've been desensitized too.
Because, a lot.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I see one of those videos on Facebook, like, I'm just appalled and can't believe. But it's like it's turned into the norm. And
it turns into a joke.
Yeah. I mean, you have people dying and getting stabbed, and it's just like, it's entertainment.
Exactly. And when it's entertainment in our homes, we also start using it as a response to an action. Right. So then it becomes normal response to things.
Exactly.
So the other two that I wanted to mention is that I mentioned stress earlier.
Yes.
It's not stress that's actually the cause. It's the expression of your feelings, how you learn to control your emotions, and how you learn to handle things like anger and violence becomes more about the last cause of abuse, which is the decision. Right? Because ultimately, regardless of our history, our experience, our past, our society, at some point, because we are responsible as individuals, we make a decision to actually either not get help because we have some history in our family, or we make a decision that says that this is the norm I know, excuse me, and this is the norm I'm comfortable with, so I'm going to keep it up.
Right.
And that becomes even for the person who's being abused as well as the abuser.
Exactly.
And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, especially culturally, from the, African American perspective, we find it hard to reach out,
very difficult.
Yeah, to get help.
For any kind of help.
Yeah.
Like, I get on my soapbox with that one, because I also, one of the things that I advocate for is women and mental health, specifically Black women, mental health related, and getting help.
Okay.
Because it's one of the things that's dear to me, because I feel like the longer we pretend that there's no problem, the more problems we will have.
Yes.
And as a result, this domestic violence is one of the indicators of what's going on in our communities that's not being addressed.
Yeah.
It's just one of the many factors that becomes, if we would deal with some of the things that we're not dealing with, the underlying. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Exactly. But yeah,
I'm gonna get off my soapbox so we can keep talking domestic violence.
But you made a good point. When you ignore a problem, that's not addressing the issue.
Exactly.
It's not addressing the issue at all. It's not going to stop the problem. It's not going to make the problem go away. The problem is going to continue on because it's not being addressed.
Exactly. And the longer we don't address it, it actually escalates.
And it escalates, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better if you don't say anything. It's not going to get better if you don't reach out.
Exactly.
It's not going to get better if you don't tell anyone.
And it's not going to get better if we judge people when they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I also think part of what happens in our culture is stigma. The stigma related to any form of help is about what we think people are going to think.
Right.
And reality says that you need to put aside what people are going to think, but people, please stop thinking that you don't need the help too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all of us have areas, where we need to work. But if somebody's reaching out to you, or even if they're not reaching out to you, and you see signs of abuse, go to them, and ask them and help them. They may deny it. They may say, no, it's not them. But no, you go, take the initiative, and reach out to that person to see how you may, be able to help them. Because this literally could mean life or death.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about power and control.
Okay. So first I want to talk about the cycle of violence, the cycle of violence that people are used to hearing about. The cycle of violence is the phases where it escalates, acute batter, and then the honeymoon and sorrow kind of a phase.
Yeah.
So what traditional help used to think was that the violence would happen. So someone would beat, or let's just use physical abuse because it's the easy example.
Yeah.
Someone would hit you, and then they would feel like it would, first off, you would get into an argument, and then it would escalate into the actual physical abuse, right? So that's phase 1 and 2. And then phase 3 would be that they would come back and they would give you roses and they would give you kisses and hugs and tell you that everything's going to be all right and I'll never do this again.
Exactly.
So this theory is outdated, people, for a lot of reasons. I think we kind of discussed some of the reasons why it's outdated, but what's always been the truth is that not everyone goes in a circular behavioral pattern. When it comes down to it, some people never experience the last phase, which is honeymoon. The reason why they may not experience is because of the things that we just spoke about when it comes to calls. After I already gotten to a point of abuse, it also becomes the norm of our relationship.
Right.
So what the woman will find themselves doing is trying to find ways not to make him angry, not to get him to do anything tonight. But then ultimately there becomes nothing she can do because that's his norm in this relationship. Right. So even if she did everything right by what he said he wanted her to do, somehow it would still escalate. Exactly. So the reason why the theory is no longer used amongst domestic violence, or not so much no longer used, because people still talk about it, but the reason why it's not as popular and why they created the power control wheel is because not everyone is going to experience the honeymoon stage because of the escalation of violence. And depending on where they're at in their relationship, the violence may not even be physical. So there may not be a need for the pampering, the love, and the response of like roses and things like that.
Right.
So it's no longer used for basically because you can't guarantee that there is that honeymoon stage.
Okay. So we can't guarantee that each woman that's in this situation will experience all 3 stages.
Exactly.
So they might experience just phase 1 and phase 2, but they may never get to phase 3.
Exactly.
They may just stay at a constant state of stage 2.
Yeah. Which means that they are actually, if you think about intimidation and violence, you're basically on alert at all times because you're almost in a state of anxiety.
Yeah. Okay.
And so they can't guarantee, no, I don't care if you give me no roses when I'm in that state.
Right. Exactly. So that state is just when the woman, maybe she's just trying to just keep the peace, where he said, I need to cook more. Where he says, I need to clean more. Where he says, I need to do this. So,
and he's trying to find reasons, or you're trying to find ways to make it better.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee.
Yeah. And another thing women need to realize is, or look after, or look for, I guess, as a sign is that if you're always the problem, that's the red light. Like if it's always you, if it's always you, if there's always something you can do to improve the relationship or to make the relationship better, and there's nothing that he can do, that's a red flag, because it takes 2 people
it always has.
It takes 2 people to make a relationship work. It takes 2 people.
And it takes 2 people to make it not work.
And it takes 2 people to make it not work. Exactly. Yeah. Especially if you're not on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay, so now you want to talk about the power and control? Yeah.
Yes. And so now, since we talked about the cycle of abuse, which most people know the cycle of abuse, that's just something that has been kind of like reinforced over and over in like shows and movies and that kind of thing, which I think is good because awareness is awareness. And if we can get awareness when it comes to domestic violence, that to me is better than nothing.
Exactly.
But when it comes down to actually helping to help people identify that they might be in an abusive relationship, or to help people actually identify that there's a problem or it could escalate into something more, the power control wheel is really how you can actually start to do some form of interventions. And even as a friend, a layman, but it's also specifically for social workers, for therapists, for people who are going to work with those who are abused and may not know they are. This will give you an opportunity to actually identify areas that are not just about being hit.
Right.
And so when we think about those power and control wheels, there are multiple areas that's on there. So there's things like using intimidation, using an emotion. So intimidation, making you afraid by like looking at you like he's going to come and hit you, right? or smashing things down or hitting the wall so hard that if he was you, I would have probably hurt you.
Yeah.
You know, so that's intimidating you to know that you're next.
Right.
I know this sounds silly, but abusing pets, right? So if a person is very aggressive towards your pet, that could be a clear sign that they could be aggressive towards you.
Yeah.
That's not to say that they will, but it could be the start of you being able to identify some signs in this person.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they also do things like display weapons. So because violence is such a normal thing, we assume that this is only happening in certain people or certain economic statuses, but it's happening to everyone.
Yeah.
And so things like, well, he displayed his guns in the house. They're legal, but he's trying to let you know that at any time, if things go wrong, he could handle it, right? Or making you feel threatened when you're around him by pulling out his gun, if legal or not illegal, right? So things like those things, like that becomes intimidation. And if you intimidate a person long enough, they start to get in line.
Exactly.
I know that sounds bad, but it is.
Yeah. But that's the purpose of intimidation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the purpose, to get you in line.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Using emotional abuse is also on the wheel. Like the things that you talked about earlier with name calling, calling you out of your name, calling your friends out of their names, like making you feel like you are who you are around.
Right.
Right. So if I call your girlfriends sluts and whores, then that means who else is one?
Exactly.
Right. And so, or humiliating you, like making you feel bad in front of people, where they, oh, doesn't she look fat in that outfit, and making a joke about it, and this, all your friends are laughing, but they're laughing at you,
right?
And now all of a sudden you're identifying yourself differently. Oh my God, I must have a weight problem.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Isolation. This is one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
Because it's scary to note how many people will tell you they literally were moved away from their families, and moved away from their families could be from the neighborhood, but literally across the country, out of the state, places that would be so far away from anyone that you know, so that also you have no one to go to.
Exactly.
And part of that isolation becomes your family, your friends, your coworkers, associates at school that you might just be doing a study group with. All of a sudden, you're not allowed to be in groups.
Yeah.
Things that will clearly make you only theirs.
Yeah. And that's just to add to your point, I think that's a huge red flag, that we as women need to pay attention to, because I think the man, he'll make it sound like, well, I love you and I just want to be around you all the time, and you don't need anyone else but me. But that's a red flag. If he doesn't want you to be around anyone, if he doesn't want you to talk to anyone, if you can't socialize, if you can't have like a normal,
or say things like you can't have any male friends.
Yeah.
Like, now everyone has their own opinion about this,
right?
But the reality is that it's not normal for a person to dictate exactly who you can relate to.
Exactly.
Here. Now, you could have your own views about it. Even as a woman, you might say, well, I don't want him having no women friends either. Maybe you need to check yourself as well. Not to say
but
exactly. The reality is that because we're a social people, we're going to be exposed to people of all genders, all races. And for us to start to just pretend like we're only going to have one type of person we could ever be around.
Exactly.
That becomes a sign to me. Because it's a impossible thing for you to achieve, which will also be part of how he will be able to escalate later on.
Exactly.
So when we think about it, it really becomes, well, makes sense.
Exactly. And then it's like, to your point, the person that's saying that, if you have to say that I don't want you to be around other men or women, stop for a moment and examine yourself to see why
you need that.
Or what is that doing for you? If your mate, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend have outside relationship with people of the opposite sex, what is that doing to you? To make you say that. So it must striking up some type of jealousy or something
that you haven't dealt with relates to trust.
Yeah, something within you,
yourself or them.
Yeah, that hasn't been dealt with. Yeah, so that's not quite healthy.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And these are all signs.
Yeah.
And none of them are just done alone.
Exactly.
And so when we think about the other ones that are on the wheel, because I'm going to try not to talk through all of them because I could
Yeah.
go on and on.
Yeah.
Like, we have minimizing and blaming,
Mm-hmm.
which means that things like, well, I didn't hit you that hard.
Right.
Or you could just go cover that up.
Yeah.
Right. So it seems like having that conversation would be abnormal to most of us. Right.
Right.
But if I'm an abuser, then I've also been abused. And also if I'm a woman who's been abused, it becomes normal to me to minimize it.
Mm-hmm.
So you might even hear her say, well, no, he just pushed me. Don't
Mm-hmm.
worry. It didn't matter. We don't fight. It's not like he punches me or nothing.
Right.
But he slaps you.
Yeah.
But he'll push you. He'll
Yeah.
make you fall onto things. And literally this past week here in the Pennsylvania area, a young couple was fighting. They were 19 and I think 20. And they ended up in a physical fight. They were a couple. They were fought out in public before.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got into a private room, he pushed her so hard she hit a nightstand and died.
Oh.
And so it's that simple thing that you minimize that could be the end of your life or his by mistake, because that becomes something that is minimized that could be really serious. Exactly. The other things are for women who have children by their abusers, because this is a difficult area. Mm-hmm. They actually start to use the children. Mm. So they will say things like, if you leave me, I'll hurt you or the children. Mm-hmm. Make you feel guilty about making the kids be away from their dad. Mm-hmm. No real woman wouldn't want their father in the child's life. How dare you? Threatening to take them away from you is one of the ways that they really will intimidate you again. Yeah. But also because when we talk about economic abuse, they usually are the person that controls or have everything under control. Mm-hmm. They can also say, you don't have any way to provide for our children. Right. So without me, you can't do nothing for your kids. Right. Yeah. And so now they're using your children against you. Yeah. And when we talk about why people don't leave, what woman would leave their children and not feel hurt? Because women had to make that choice. But believe me, it was not an easy choice to make. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is male privilege. This country is... Yes. When we hear the word privilege, I could go on and on because there's financial privilege, there's white privilege, there's male privilege, there's heterosexual privilege. Mm-hmm. But when we specifically talk about the power and control, we think about male privilege. And they things like you're supposed to serve your husband. Yes. Right? A man makes all the decisions in the household. Yes. I'm the master of my castle. Mm-hmm. I'm the king of my household. Uh-huh. And we jokingly say some of these things. That's fine. The problem becomes when it becomes how I rule my home. Right. Where it becomes, if you don't abide by these rules, right, you will see what that master has to do to his slave. Exactly. You'll get punished. What that person, so you'll get punished. Once again, going back to that relationship role, almost as if I am the dominant person in the relationship. Exactly. And then the last two, actually, I'm going to leave the last one. The other one that we talk about is threats. Okay. And just like the threats to the children, they actually make threats to you. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you leave me, I'm going to hurt you. But one of the things that I think, especially for a cultural element, just real quick, is that a lot of it also is about making you do things illegal. Mm. And when I say do things illegal, like steal, hold his drugs, hold his gun. Mm-hmm. Like we start doing things that will actually get us in trouble, and then he can use that against you in a way to threaten to if you leave him. Well, the same way if I go down, you gonna go down. Right. Right. And it seems so like, well, no, how could that be the case? But part of it is if I looked at all those other areas and he's also doing this one, part of that is control. Yeah. And part of that is putting you in the position to have to be with him. Okay. Yeah. Right. And so threatening things like suicide, right? I'm going to kill myself if you leave. Yes. If you ever leave me, I don't know what I will do with myself. Mm-hmm. Or I'll kill the people you love. Right. Right? Exactly. And depending on, and when we talk specifically about dating violence for younger people, that's the one that's used more often. Yeah. I'll kill your parents. If you tell your dad, I'll make sure he'll never know what's coming. Right. And then all of a sudden you wonder why she's with him all the time and pushing away from her dad. Yeah. Not talking to her dad about what's going on because I don't want him to get hurt. Yeah. And then the last one is economic abuse. Okay. And we talked about it in a sense because we use it as just one definition. But economic abuse can be used throughout all of the areas. because it's the way that we get resources and access to things.
Exactly.
And so when we think about like male privilege, we think about using our children, we think about intimidation or even emotional abuse, we can always use money in those areas. And a lot of times that becomes the main source of what they're using.
Okay. Well, I think next, let's talk about, I think we're talking about barriers to leaving.
Okay. But after all of that, why would you? After I threatened to kill you.
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, right?
Why would you? Yeah.
You would think that means that I should just get up and leave, but I had to laugh. My husband was just came in and he was like, "I'm so used to kissing you." He's looking at me like, "What's going on?" When he comes in the house. So my apologies, people. Real life happens. But when we think about why a person stays, a lot of times we jokingly say, "Well, she should just leave."
Yeah.
Right? But I just want to give some real facts before we say that. Most women leave 6 to 7 times before they actually break their relationship ties with abusers. So when you're telling a woman she should just leave, believe me, she's probably already tried it. So you're not giving her some new information that she's not aware that she needs to do.
Right.
So we need to start with being a little bit more empathetic and cautious of how we approach people with our like almost aggression. Girl, you got to leave before he kills you.
Right.
That approach is great, but it sure ain't gonna be helpful if I tried to leave and the last time I tried, he beat me so bad I was in the hospital.
Right.
And so I think we need to know those things first before we just assume that she's gonna leave. Right. The other thing that we need to know is that the most common time for murder is when the spouse or the victim is actually leaving.
Yeah.
And so when we think about those two facts, we have to be aware that that means that it's not easy to leave.
Yeah.
And if I hear another woman saying that she should just leave, I would love for us to put ourselves in their shoes for just a moment when it comes down to if every time I leave, it escalated. Yeah. The next time I leave could be the end of me.
Yeah.
So it's not so easy just to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's easy for, us to say if we're not in that situation. But if you're in that situation, it's like you have so many other elements of the situation. Yeah, to think about, like especially if you're not working, especially if he's the breadwinner, you don't have any money. You have the kids. What are you gonna do with the kids? Where are you gonna go? I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of different things.
Just listen to 2 of my 4. You listen. The first one is the fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you think about the reason that people don't leave is that I'm afraid for my life in the relationship. What do you think is going to happen if I left him?
Right.
If I'm living in fear constantly and it's still escalating to violence, no matter what I do. When I choose that or make that choice to leave, do you think it's going to be easy for me? Because I'm afraid that when I leave, it could kill me. Right. Or my second one, I have fear that he'll kill my kids.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, it's no longer just me that I worry about.
Right.
So those top 2 reasons are the most important to remember when we are just telling someone to leave. I've been in this relationship long enough where it hurts every day.
Right.
And so trying to come up with an idea in my mind, as well as my self-esteem is so low and shattered at this point that I can't even come up with enough reasons that if I leave him, I'll be safe.
Right.
Right. And then you said the other one, you said no money, no resources. If I've used financial abuse throughout the cycle of abuse, that also means that I have no access to most things, even my own paycheck.
Exactly.
There was a woman that I worked with who literally was making more than her husband and had no money when she left.
Yeah.
Not a dime.
Yeah.
And that becomes more about I have no choice but to run.
Right.
And she literally had to start everything over. And he still fought her when she left.
Right.
So it doesn't just, it's just not, I'm going to leave. And then the last one is, if I've isolated you so much, usually I've isolated and broken those relationships. And because I've isolated and broken those relationships, the person who's being abused feels like they have no one to go to.
Yes.
And or if every time my friends told me to leave before, I never did, I also feel kind of embarrassed to come to you now.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I always talk to people about who wants to help remember to remind them that no matter what decision they make, you're going to be there.
Right.
And no matter what decision she makes, you still be there.
Right.
And I know that sucks because we all figure, well, she going to be there. I don't have to be a part of this. You don't. You're right. But if you truly want to be able to help her out of it, part of being there is going to be able to say, all right, he did it again. Come on over.
Yeah, exactly.
He did it again. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I ain't going to talk to him. Right. I ain't going to be his friend.
Yeah.
Because I ain't going to handle it the same.
Yeah, yeah.
But I will be here when you need to. And I'm also not going to judge you.
Right.
And what I'm trying to say by judgment is to also say that I love you through this. You are lovable.
Yeah.
Look how great you are. So those things that they're doing on that wheel, you're doing some of the opposite work.
Yeah.
Reminding them of the woman that they were before or even during what they're doing.
Exactly.
And so to me, that becomes really important. The 4 things and the 4 main reasons that, and this list is not unofficial list, but if you think about all we talked about,
right,
it would make sense to you that fear
for
my kids, having no resources and having no supports could be reasons why all of us would stay.
Right. Exactly.
Period. And I think if we could just put ourselves, and I know as social workers, we use that word empathy all the time.
All the time.
And we need to recall that word when we're working with this population specifically, because I think all people struggle because they feel like, well, I would just leave or I would just do this. But the reality is that you're not the one that has been put through a cycle.
Right.
Has been put through the ringer in terms of your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. And as a result, you're not the one who's in this situation, but you can still support them.
Right. And I think supporting them, during this time is key, because it's like we can't make the decision for the person, to leave. And so the only thing at that point, if you know someone is going through this situation, is to be there for support. So, I mean, they have to get to the point to where, they want to leave on their own, for themselves. They have to see the benefit, And
then I know that we're not talking interventions and stuff today, but I do think that if you are truly going to work with this population, you also need to be able to be aware of what is considered a safety plan for them to be able to be in the relationship and have alternatives if things escalate out of the control, even in that moment. Now, that's not to say that you are saying stay, but it's to say that you don't leave a person without options if they do stay. Because I think some of our centers or some of our providers are all about the after, with the shelter, the getting you a new place and getting you out of the location. And I think that's great and keeping you safe. And we should have those. Yeah. But I also think that we have to be aware that some people are going to stay a little longer. Yeah. So we have to come up with ways to make sure that they have a phone number to call, a word to say. I saw the commercial during the Super Bowl where the lady called the police and was trying to order pizza. She was really trying to tell them that she was being abused. That becomes sometimes part of your plan. Right. That has to be what your plan is. You know what? Call the police. Right. Instead of telling the police that you're being abused, tell them that you need to order a pie. Right. Now, we might not want to use pizza because everybody saw that commercial, but you can sure call about that leaking sink or something. Right, yeah. So being able to use creative ways to help people who do stay is just as important as helping those who leave. And that's not to say I'm saying to stay. It's to say that we got to be more creative with how we help. If we just want people to survive and live, that's my own soapbox. So yeah. But I wanted to give some principles real quick because I also want to make sure if you had any follow-up questions or anything, we can still talk. Some principles when working with people with domestic violence is how you believe and what you believe about abuse becomes extremely important. So the same way with any population that you're working with, your biases become very important in this area. So if you believe that the abuser, the person being abused, is at fault or somehow make them feel more somewhat victim blaming or making them feel worse about their situation, this isn't the population for you. And that's fine because you just do better somewhere else. That's okay. Right. It's okay. Yeah. And that means you understand that they are not responsible for their abuse. So because we talked about all those elements of that cycle, we can also understand more about what happens with the mind and how a person can stay, because we also understand that this is about creating a process of abuse. Right. Which means that I'm going to have to get you ready for what I'm going to do to you. Exactly. whether I like it
Exactly.
or not.
Yeah,
We also
exactly.
we can collaborate with domestic violence services in talking about shelters. At the end, we're going to give a hotline. Just collaborate and see what's going on, because you may be trying to create something new that's already being done, and they could just use more support,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And you said this earlier, they need to make the decision.
Yeah.
Whenever you're working with someone, regardless of the population,
Mhm.
ultimately for change and growth, that person has to decide they're ready to make that change and growth.
Right.
Whenever they come to it, you're still there.
Right.
And you're still there when they're not at that point.
Right.
And then understand that this takes time,
Yeah.
and it takes a caring heart,
Yeah.
and it takes a person that is committed to loving someone through
Through.
as well as after.
Exactly.
And that, to me, if you think about any population we work with, is extremely important anyway.
Mhm.
But when it comes to domestic violence and we talk about family intervention, regardless of the type of violence, assaults, violence against women, period, you
Mhm.
have to be willing to take the time with them.
Yeah.
Because now this is a trauma that even after they are done, the physical or actual abusive relationship, there's still things that needs to be done.
Exactly. And I think that's a great this is a great way to end this interview. And I just want to add that, if anyone out there knows anyone that's experienced, is in a domestic violence relationship, just know it didn't take it overnight
Mm-hmm.
for, this situation to happen, and it won't take overnight for the situation, to be solved or resolved. So just be there for them. You can't make the decision for them to leave. All you can do is support them.
Yes.
If and when they do, be there for them, and just be there.
So
Just be there.
just be there. And I want to give out a domestic violence hotline number that is the national line. So it's 1-800
Okay.
799 SAFE. SAFE, if you spell out the word, is 7233. So it's 1-800 799 7233. And that's a domestic violence hotline. And they will be able to give you resources, information in your area, help with shelters, relocation, food, different personal items that you might need if you actually are getting out of the situation. And just know that you are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
That as social workers, we do care.
Yes.
Right? I think that becomes very important. But as humans,
Yes.
we need to care more. And I think you said it best. This is something that you just be there for them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Sharia, I would like to thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Um, Man, this is it's a heavy subject, but
It's very heavy.
it's something that we must address. And there's never too much information going on about.
It's never.
It's never
And
too much.
And if anyone is interested in more information and I can help to provide it, I'm just going to give some, I guess, my information, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
You can email me at Sharia, SHAREA, at radiantsunshine.org. Radiantsunshine.org is also where you can find me in terms of my blogging. I blog on a number of different topics, but specifically issues surrounding self-esteem in women and being able to develop a healthier self. I actually just released a book, so you'll see some information on there about it. I'm not going to go into that commercial. And so if you do want information specifically about domestic violence, I am still open to sharing and giving more information. And if I can help you to find resources, you can email me as well at that Sharia at radiantsunshine.org.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Sharia.
You're welcome.